Welcome back, everyone. One of the trends we've seen for years is the increasing engagement of professional leagues and teams in youth and local sports. And in the context of a very fragmented industry, professional leagues have a unique and strategic interest in what happens in youth, whether it's because of player development or fan development, club revenues, or of course, their commitment to communities. And I think every youth sports organization, local sports organization, has an opportunity to learn from their example. So I'm thrilled to be engaging two dynamic sports leaders who are really leading figures in bringing back professional sports in this country. We'll cover their focus on return to play, but also understand the growing role that the MLS and PLL will have in youth soccer and lacrosse moving forward. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage, Don Garber, Commissioner of the MLS. Welcome, Don. And Paul Rabel, professional lacrosse player and co-founder and CMO of the Professional Lacrosse League. One of the things that excites me, and we're sort of, as we looked at your leadership of the MLS and the premier professional soccer league in the United States and Canada since 1999, it seems that whatever you set your mind to, you've been able to lead the MLS to drive growth and broader community impact. So whether that's club expansion or stadium development, building Soccer United marketing, and now leading the MLS in the return to play, we're excited to hear and benefit from all those experiences today. So thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
And Paul, one of the things, as we've gotten to know each other, you're clearly a winner on the field, 7-time champion, 3-time MVP, but you're also prolific off the field. One of the things I liked was your designation by Sports Techie as the most tech-savvy athlete on the planet. So I just hope that your judgment about technology extends to all your investments through Rabel Ventures for personal reasons. And then beyond that, I also want to be remiss if I didn't mention all the great work for the Paul Rabel Foundation, which we've had the benefit of supporting at League Apps. And thanks to you for all that you do, and we're excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So one thing to start is, as we think about this audience, you have youth sports organizations and local sports organizations all around the country tuning in. And they're eager to understand, as they wrestle with the various considerations about returning to play themselves, right? Playing soccer, playing lacrosse, playing whatever sport it may be. And they're navigating all these questions about health and safety, the formats, the competitions they might be playing. So Don, I'll turn to you first, because as MLS prepares to return to play, can you describe a little bit about what you've learned from a health and safety standpoint that's really helped inform the return to play strategy that you're rolling out?
It starts, Jeremy, that, leagues by their very nature are always very focused on the health and safety of their players, but never in a pandemic environment. And from day one, which was in early March, I don't think there's a league of any size, whether it's the largest or the smallest, that hasn't had to become an expert in infectious disease and how are we going to understand the development of COVID and how we're going to manage testing and what kinds of protocols are we going to put into place to return to play, not both in the short term, but in the next normal, where we're going to be looking at how to protect our players when they're back in their stadiums and sanitize environments for them and for workers that are in our facilities, but probably as importantly, ensuring that we can protect our fans. So this is uncertain times, and it's forced the entire industry to get smart real fast. And it's without much leadership from the government, frankly, because the government's trying to figure it out as well. And it's the decentralization of decision-making, where ordinarily, when it comes to health, we look to the federal government for guidance and support. We look to our local hospitals and medical thought leaders, but we're in new ground. And as we all know, states and local health authorities are trying to manage their own decision-making as this disease continues to, or this COVID continues to evolve from its beginning to hopefully what will be its end. So I never thought that I'd be on Zoom calls with Dr. Fauci or speaking to the White House about infectious diseases or having to have a staff person become an expert in the area and spend, as Paul will probably talk about in his return to play, millions and millions and millions of dollars to ensure that we are able to test all of our athletes so that they can return to play in a safe environment, safe for themselves, but for their teammates, and then ultimately their families at home.
Paul, and talk about the experience that you're having at PLL as you're navigating these same questions.
Yeah, I think Don really covered a lot, which for us, as we reflect on getting to our decision, it was like studying for a final exam every night, beginning on March 12th and taking us all the way even to where we are now. But certainly prior to making our announcement in the middle of May uh, about our solution, which is a fully quarantined and fanless model, we had the advantages of being that smaller league that Donna mentioned, and that we have 7 teams. So our scale has enabled us to be more agile and led us to coming to a solution sooner than leagues with 20, 30 teams. Because what it comes down to is health and safety, and health and safety leads to medical protocol, because we will not be playing, any of us, in an environment right now or in 2020 with a vaccine or any type of treatment or drug, at least that's FDA approved, which if you look at, based on our research and the experts and the consultations that we've done through the similar pipeline that MLS and our colleagues have as well, is if you look at tracking back to some sense of normalcy, or as Don said, new normal, the first step is identifying a drug or treatment that's FDA approved and can be provided at scale to 300 plus million Americans. And the other is a vaccination. Until that, consumer confidence is still largely unknown. Consumers as your fans. And that was the first decision that was made through conversation across all of the commissioners and owners in sports, probably as early as end of March or the first week of April, where that became a foregone conclusion that we were going to be playing without fans as leagues. And then you start moving down the path. Well, what differentiates our players on field and their transportation to field and practice and such from the potential risk that fans have? And so our focus became on, okay, what is the medical protocol that we developed? So we brought on external experts in internal medicine and as well as infectious disease, and began consulting down that path. And then access to testing was one part of the solution. The other part was, frankly, as a sports league, there's a lot of logic around us bringing back a sense of excitement for fans and getting our skilled labor, which are our players and our coaches, back to work like the rest of the industry and the world is trying to do, but doing so appropriately such that we're not, in many leagues' cases, pulling COVID tests away from symptomatic cases across the country. So the next identifier for us, as it was MLS, is looking at, okay, this is how many tests we're going to need over the course of our shortened or compressed season. What is the rest of America looking like from a point of care testing capacity? And are we going to be in a position where we're pulling tests away from others? And so that's where a lot of the White House and the administration, their task force, was in place, giving us predictive information. So it was a lot. And I think we're kind of aligned in the same thing, in that medical was first, business model was second, as we've both had to iterate, not having gate receipts, not having the trickle down of local sponsors as a result of having fans on site. And largely our business have turned into focusing in 2 areas, which is viewership and national sponsors.
Yeah, and as I hear both of you speak, you can empathize with the local sports organization that doesn't. The closest they're going to get to Anthony Fauci is on CNN when he's on. So they've got to navigate these questions and think about protocols. And at the end of the day, it's about getting the best kind of information, looking at those guidelines, and developing those protocols. Don, I'm interested for you to pick up where Paul left off, which is, there's that expression that necessity is the mother of all invention. And it seems like as you think about the return to play, and as you guys have designed a solution that was announced today, the idea of innovation, of experimenting with new technologies, new media, new formats, it seems like that's an opportunity, right? It's as you kind of navigate what's happening. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of innovations that you're excited about as you think about return to play?
Jeremy, I've always believed that out of crisis comes opportunity, and MLS, and Paul can relate to this and probably even studied it a bit. MLS has had its challenges over our 25 years. Our founding was coming out of the World Cup in '94, and then we had a labor issue from day one. We all experienced challenges in the launch of the league, and then 9/11 hits. We contracted some teams and we reorganized. We formed a parallel company to help fund the league through commercial revenues. We have a recession. We fight for every stadium project that we have now 25 stadiums, and every one was a challenge to get funded and then ultimately get constructed in the right location. And throughout it all, every time we faced these moments of truth, I was fortunate to have a great group of really smart owners that were so committed to soccer in America and the idea that our country deserved a top Division I league, and then really believed in the importance of our sport and what it could do to build community and represent a new America from a demographic perspective and all the things that MLS stands for. But this one kind of hit us upside the head, and we didn't see it coming. We were launching our 25th season with 2 new teams in Nashville and Miami, and could not have been more excited about that. Record ratings for us in attendance our first 2 weeks of the season. And then all of a sudden, our world stops. And then clearly you're in triage mode the moment that happens. And frankly, it's only been of late that we got out of triage mode. And we tried to think about, as we were managing through, ensuring we were keeping the league viable, that we were managing health and safety, both for players and staff, and very focused on that from the get-go. But very quickly, we evolved to what did we need to do to get our players back on the field. We knew that there was uncertainty to getting back in our stadiums, whether with or without fans. To Paul's point, we knew they would be without fans. The economics of that are a challenge, but we just didn't know when that could happen. Spreading out and different states managing it differently, and all of the things associated with that I don't need to go into. We needed a new plan, and that plan, fortunately for us, was at Disney. We have relationships with the company, certainly at the highest level at Disney, but also through ESPN. Disney World was empty. Florida was very aggressive in how they were trying to bring their economy back, and Disney's a big driver of that economy. But man, we had issues from day one. We had to manage through a new labor agreement, because certainly the work rules for an environment where you're going into quarantine, like Paul is talking about, are complicated, difficult, and not in accordance with the current CBA that we had. We needed to figure out how we will get close to 2,000 people into an environment in a bubble for what will now be 45 to 50 days. It started at 8 weeks, because that's what we thought we needed to have a competition that could drive the revenue that we felt was important. And it was months of working day in and day and night in conjunction with our players and with infectious disease doctors, with ESPN, Fox, and Univision, with Disney and Wide World of Sports facility and all of that. And ultimately today we were able to announce what that will look like. And we're not there yet. We haven't arrived. The first players will arrive in early July, and we're gonna do everything we can to make it great. It's never been done before. The NBA will be right on our tails, because they'll be down at Disney at the same time, starting their play about a month later. Small group of people on site. You can imagine the testing of 2,000 people on almost a daily basis and the expense associated with that. Lastly, and I don't want to speak too long before Paul talks, but broadcast innovations in the games that we'll produce will be unprecedented, at least for our sport. We're producing games on youth soccer fields. That's not the environment that we want to present our players or what our fans expect. So the virtual environment, the replacement advertising that'll be created, the fan environments that we're going to create virtually, we'll have more cameras in these games than we have in MLS Cup, which is either produced on Big Fox or on ABC. And the expense associated with that is significant, because we need to create an environment that's going to look and feel and different than the environment we're shooting it in. And it needs to be compelling, and those games need to be meaningful. So I can go on and on for the rest of my time on the innovation associated with that. You'll have to tune in, Jeremy, Paul, and the rest of the group, to see what that will be. But it's going to be pretty exciting.
Well, I'm just concerned that every youth soccer organization listening is going to concern if you're raising the bar about what's happening on those fields when you think about the experience you'll deliver. Paul, as I heard Don kind of provide his insights about innovation. It sounds very much like a technology startup, and the constant innovation and iteration required to kind of navigate these uncertain times. I'm reminded of the Jeff Bezos quote, which a lot of people would ask him, what's going to be different about the world in 10 years, and what should I build my business around? And he always said, well, that's the wrong question. What's going to be the same in the next 10 years? And that's what you build your business around. And it certainly seems that people love sports, love competition, and there's a long-term orientation there. But at the same time, there's a lot of innovation about how you deliver that experience, especially as it relates to kind of engaging young athletes. And I think about the game experience you all already were offering at the PLL, and the ways that your players are engaged. But what is the opportunity for innovation here? Even as we think about the long-term kind of outlook about pro sports, which is so positive.
Yeah, it's a great quote. I'll address it in three ways. So, as Don had mentioned, production's critical, and there's an investment from all leagues into innovating around the production. So, for those that are watching, we think about your network partner. Ours is NBC, and then your production that goes into the broadcast that you see. And we innovated in our inaugural year last season by basically having hot mics on players that were wired into our commentators in the booth, which, mic'd up series are not novel to a degree in sports, but the ability for take an offensive coordinator in the NFL communicating to the quarterback between plays and sometimes, in the huddles. We access that same technology, and our commentators in the booth were talking to our players while they were on the field. We're nimble, and we are very much at a stage as a single-ended organization that the MLS was 25 years ago, as Don had mentioned, except access to different technology than what the MLS had. So it's a core principle and a core value of ours to innovate and encourage creativity and do things differently, and perhaps stuff that we may not be able, or will take more lobbying to do 20 years from now as our organization grows. So production will be enhanced, and we think about it in a similar way. Our most highly produced game is our PLL Championship last summer in Philadelphia. We'll have more cameras. We have the ability to, kind of take what they call in the production world the game cam, bring it closer to the field. Thinking about ways to use steady cams, which I'll reference the NFL and how the camera crew runs on the field to celebrate a touchdown, so you get really close to the player. Well, let's think about game shots from that sideline angle. We've seen the Bundesliga experiment with kind of former audio nat sound into the broadcast. We've also had the luxury to watch the WWE and the UFC and even late night television end of March to see what the experience is like for a viewer without any crowd ambiance. And I found personally, and others did, that no disrespect to some of the late night hosts, but their jokes didn't hit as well when no one's laughing. And so we're doing a bunch of different tests right now to see how we can experiment with it. EA Sports and FIFA and Madden and those games, they've created hardware and artificial intelligence to identify moments during gameplay where the crowd naturally feels like they're there. We've also seen other leagues engage the fan on site using cardboard cutouts, and we've seen tarp designs. And so we've looked at all that stuff and have made decisions. We'll share more as it comes around, and not just the production value, but the ability to create for the fan at home an experience through new technology, whether we're hosting Zoom watch parties or stuff in Facebook's new tool called Facebook Rooms, where the fans at home are getting a similar and perhaps a more intimate experience from their second screen as they would if they would have attended in a more normal environment without COVID-19. So there's definitely I think a lot of encouragement and excitement around new technology and integrating that, of course, by necessity, but I think it requires in moments of crisis sometimes our backs to be against the wall to lean into that potential opportunity in some of these devices and technology to deploy that. Another item that's important for us is also recognizing opportunity in an economic recession, depression, understanding how industries are moving. And right now, sports betting has been on a drastic increase in growth as 2018's legislation moved for approval of sports betting from the national level to the state level. We see 22 states now approve sports betting at the local level. And then all of a sudden sports stopped. So for a new league that didn't have sports betting approved at the Division of Gaming and Enforcement level to be authorized gaming operators, now all of a sudden our ability to get approved sped up because a lot of these organizations were looking to bring on new product. So that was a silver lining opportunity for us. And we announced it a week after our quarantine announcement that we would have sports betting for the first time, which is major for any sports league. There are comedians that used to run on a joke that if you couldn't bet on it, it wasn't a sport. And so unlocking that was another example of innovation for us.
Yeah, I think what's amazing in hearing both of your kind of respective approaches is it's an example as you have to return to play and you have to modify what you're doing, how you lean into that and think about doing things differently. And so I want to shift into a conversation around youth sports, because I think youth sports organizations are navigating the same thing. One of the things that we identified in an industry report we released this week is that if youth sports organizations aren't adapting and innovating, they're going to have a hard time being able to hold on to their families and engage them. So they've got to be able to figure out how to change with the times. Don, one thing that's happened in the midst of everything else that was going on was the announcement of the expanded kind of elite development platform that the MLS is involved with, not to mention the recent partnership with U.S. Youth Soccer. And I think one thing about the COVID-19 crisis is it highlighted the fragmented nature of the youth sports world. And it seems like MLS has made a conscious decision to get more involved in youth sports. What's driving that decision?
Back in the early days, Jeremy, the founding principle of the league was, soccer in America post World Cup in '94 was exploding from the grassroots, and that we had this great opportunity to attract young kids and their families to go to games. And then we realized, pretty soon thereafter that our market was not young kids and families who were soccer oriented. It was young people that grew up with the game and now became influencers. They ran their own businesses. They were parents. They had the ability to make decisions on their own, and they had grown up with the sport. So now they can become consumers of the sport. And we pivoted our marketing away from the youth market overall. And then over time, as we started investing more and more money in player development and buying players in our sport, you purchase players from overseas and you buy their contracts. And we were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on buying an asset that was unproven. And while you might believe that player would be able to deliver value in their local market, and maybe if they were able to develop effectively, Bayern Munich might want to buy them. But while this was going on, we started realizing that if we could get into the business of developing players on our own, it would be a good investment. We launched an academy program about 10 years ago. Every team was required to invest in building out a youth system that was very elite. It frankly was focused on developing players that could be homegrown and be able to be signed to MLS contracts, avoiding the draft that we know of and broadly in the major league sports market. And then all of a sudden we started seeing that it was working. Most recently, we developed a player in Vancouver, young man that plays for Bayern Munich. We sold that player for $18 million. He was probably in the Vancouver Academy for a month and a half, and he's been valued at over $100 million today. Thankfully, we have a sell-on Alphonso Davies' contract. So if he does get signed by FC Barcelona or Manchester United, it would be worthwhile for MLS and the Vancouver Whitecaps. And as we were getting into this business, Jeremy, as you know, U.S. Soccer was struggling with developing primarily elite male athletes. The women's game was exploding and growing, and the best female players in the world are being developed here in the United States, but that wasn't happening on the men's side. And they started investing in what you all know as the U.S. Soccer Development Academy. Then COVID hits. They were not able to continue funding that for the league, if you will, who had the capability and the strategic initiative to step in and fill that void. And at the same time, there were other organizations that were looking to do that, and they've done that fairly successfully as well. But we went out and we started our program. We're calling it the Elite Youth Development Platform. We've got 90 academies that are from the professional ranks. We've got over 8,000 players that on day one are part of our platform. We've got probably 90% of the national team players at the youth level for the United States and Canada, and that will continue to grow. And the primary objective here is to provide structure, to provide our expertise, our commercial engine, our ability to help elite youth clubs take advantage of all the learning experience and resources and capabilities that Major League Soccer has been developing over the last 2 decades. I think it'll be good for the youth soccer movement. I think it'll be good for developing players in our country and in Canada. And I'm excited about it. It was a major investment on MLS's part. And I'm proud of the courage that we had in doing it. And I look forward to seeing how it plays out.
Paul, when you and I have talked about youth lacrosse, youth sports for a while, and you've been involved in that sector even prior to the PLL and the great work you're doing with the academy. And I think the concept of professionalization of youth sports used to have a negative connotation, and I really think it's important to reclaim that word, because I think what you've seen through the PLL Academy is, the professional engagement here in lacrosse is providing better experiences, higher standards, greater professionalism. So I'm curious, when you think about getting involved in youth, what are you trying to accomplish, and what are the advantages or assets that you have that you think can help you create the kind of impact that you want to have on the youth landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's dynamic too, because as a league, I think each of us are positioned uniquely in an approach to having an impact on your base, which are your youth participants. We look a lot at the MLS and what Don and his organization has done in creating the academy system, but it is different than our academy system. Their academy system, the impetus, as he alluded to, is building your homegrown stars and creating kind of the path to the destination of playing at the highest level. For us, we looked at our system originally as we've got a lot of great youth operators that are out there. The development academy into professional lacrosse as stands isn't the same kind of direct trajectory as it is in soccer, because the destination in between right now is still Division I, playing college lacrosse. And so the thinking about the model differently for us was part one. And then part two was understanding our core business, which is the product on field. And because lacrosse had been so well developed across the country with 2.5 million participants, and the pro game had been so underdeveloped, that creating a partnership with our youth operators such that we could build a really strong relationship was part one. And then part two with US Lacrosse, which is our national governing body. And we work with them in different ways. So with the youth operators, we don't go in and run our own club teams because we think they do that well. We also don't run our own tournaments because we think they do that well. But what we have are the best players in the world, that many of which like to coach the next generation of players. So we come in and we offer bespoke camps and clinics. We offer virtual training as a result of COVID, and having our full stack engineers be able to stand up a really sleek UI UX platform that delivered not only just one-on-one, but also group instruction that was uniquely positioned through the mobile device and laptop. But I think that's important because we essentially partner with the existing operators that have professionalized it, to your point. And then on the NGB side, we work with US Lacrosse to help them run and operate their now kind of youth academies up through the national team level. So we help not only with building out those tryouts, but selecting the next crop of top players that wear the red, white, and blue. So I think it's more of a supportive role for PLL Academy for us, and it's been fruitful. And we're continuing to have conversations, not just with the operators on the ground, but also the manufacturers as a tangential arm to PLL Academy, as PLL Assists, where we're working with a lot of the inner city programs like Charm City Youth Lacrosse, Harlem Lacrosse, Oakland Lacrosse, Winners Lacrosse in DC, and then providing equipment, access to fields and instruction, and that's more pro bono work and an investment on behalf of the league. So I think for us, we look at lacrosse from a participatory standpoint. It's a game that's been achieved a top 3 level of team sports and growth over the last 15 years. That's really important to our long-term success, especially as a nascent stage league, is building that kind of that brand loyalty and that brand connection between players that are now looking at PLL for the first time and the best players and building a relationship.
Yeah, and as I hear both of you talk, please go ahead, Don.
Really got it right. I mean, I think if we think about where we were, Paul, in our 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when we first started getting into the academy business, we're very much thinking about it in the same way you are, and it developed from there into what we call a pro pathway. And I believe that pro pathway is going to exist for you and your league as lacrosse continues to grow, and I'm a big believer in it, and I believe it will. The alternatives that young players will have, men and women, whether it's pursuing the opportunity to get to go to college, or it's an opportunity to be a great star player because your media partners will start continuing to elevate the heroic nature of your players and all the excitement about what all that means. And the investment is one that will ultimately continue to pay off. I will say it is enormously expensive. Yeah. And it's like any other investment in your future and investment in R&D. For us, it's not just about competition. It's about the environment. It's about talent identification. It's about coaching. And when we were in this business, it started exactly the way you're talking about it. A relationship with U.S. Soccer, players who weren't making enough money for the most part to be able to do it full time. Many of them were coaching at the youth level, and all of it morphed pretty quickly into where we are today, where it's probably an investment of over $100 million a year. And I don't know that in the short term it's paying off with great ROI, but I am 100% convinced long term it'll be the best investment that we make in building what Major League Soccer is going to be in the future.
Yeah. Don, a final question on that topic is, as you have visibility into what's happening within youth soccer, and you're obviously heavily involved with this new elite youth development platform on that player development track, you also have visibility in what's happening in youth soccer, or youth sports maybe more broadly. So for an audience that's listening to both of you that runs youth sports organizations, and there's a question that everyone's asking, which is what can be better about youth sports? What can be better about those experiences? What perspective or advice do you have for them about what concerns you about youth sports, or about what you might encourage them to be focusing on to be more impactful in their organizations?
Well, it's a question that I probably couldn't answer quickly, and I know we're getting short on time, but I'm going to give you a great anecdote. I have a guy that works for me, Jeremy, that you know well. She's a 9th grader, and she's already received 2 college Division I scholarship offers, and she's 15 years old. There's something to me that's very wrong about that. The fact that we have a system that is beginning to professionalize young players at a time in their development where they have a lot that they need to be thinking about. And in my view, that creates a pressure to specialize. And we could have a separate discussion on specialization and the impact that has on our athletes, our society overall, and the whole ecosystem of sports. So I think there are such existential issues that the industry has that leaders need to take some responsibility in trying to change. I sit on the board for US Soccer. I've been on the board for 20 years, which is too long for anybody to be on any board. And I've seen soccer develop at the youth level over the last 2 decades, and I don't see a lot of change over those last 20 years. The issues of pay to play continue to plague soccer overall. I think if you're a youth soccer team leader, I get, respect, and totally understand that, because it's a business and you ought to run it as a business. But I question whether that is providing enough opportunity for all, and lack of opportunity in our sport, as I've been addressing some of the issues that we as a country have been dealing with over the last 2 weeks, and frankly, for way longer than that, and speaking to some of our Black players and seeing what it was like for them to have to grow up in an environment where they didn't believe they had the same opportunity as young male white players. So there are so many challenges. That being said, there's such an enormous opportunity to make deep impact. And I think the most influential relationships that young people have outside of their families is the opportunity to engage with a great young coach, to engage with teammates, to have an opportunity to succeed and fail, and to understand what it's like to work together, not just on the field, but very importantly, in both lacrosse and soccer, they're very similar in terms of the numbers of people that play and the incredible commitment that people have to the sport at a young level and the coaches have to the sport. And it's teaching young people, and has the opportunity to teach them what they need to be off the field and how they need to be managing their lives and so many other things that are important to our country and to the world. So I have hope that all of us, particularly with companies like yours and innovative leagues like Paul's, that are thinking about vertically connecting from youth all the way up to the pro game from the get-go, as opposed to in my sport, where we're just figuring out how to do this now. And pro soccer's been around for a long time. And if we're able to collaborate together and be very thoughtful how we engage with parents, with government agencies, with sponsors, with broadcasters, and with the leaders of youth sport coming together, like I'm confident we will with our new program, then I have optimism that we'll be able to build a better mousetrap. And ultimately, kids will benefit by that, but also those youth leaders who've devoted their lives to developing, in my case, soccer players, and trying to build a valuable business, which everybody should have the right and opportunity to do.
Paul, I'll give you the final word, a quick final word, because I think Don provides this audience with such a great invitation, this industry and innovation, to be a positive part of the solution, to make sure that every kid has access to amazing sports experiences, even as they build an innovative business. And as one of the top sports entrepreneurs, if you believe all the magazine titles, any final words you'd have for this audience that's looking to try to make the right kind of impact?
Yeah, well, as a preamble, it's been difficult throughout this conversation to follow Don because he's such a great speaker and is covering so much ground so quickly. But I'll say that the three of us can agree on the certain benefits and kind of growth that we've seen from the professionalization of youth sports when done well. We think about our sport probably more like hockey and golf than soccer. I grew up playing rec sports, and my first sport I played was soccer, and then the second was basketball. And lacrosse, like hockey and golf, are also expensive, which is another large barrier because of the equipment and cost of equipment. If you look at another equipment-based sport like football, they got it right early in rec by lending equipment to those who went out for the team. Certainly some things to discuss from a health and safety standpoint there. Yeah. But for us, we look at the revitalization of rec sports, and in particular rec lacrosse, is something that Don mentions, a deep investment that we're looking at, that our sport is looking at. There are psychodynamics now, given the professionalization of youth sports, where it's actually more difficult to revitalize rec than it used to be because of the peer pressure and kind of the exclusive nature of how club programs have developed. And again, no disrespect, a lot of them have helped sport grow and commercialize that trickles up to the pro game. But that's my comment there. And it's important for us to acknowledge wider youth participation in all sports. Don mentioned specialization, the impact that the NCAA has, and what they should be doing is more legislation around early recruiting, and eliminating that altogether so that students and kids feel less pressure around acquiring skill by the time they're 13 so they can get a scholarship offer, especially for non-head count sports. What I'll say related to the macro environment, and I'll wrap, is this is a really challenging time. We started this experiencing a global pandemic unlike anything any of us have been a part of in our lives. And now we're amidst a major movement in trying to reconcile one of the country's original sins in slavery and the systemic racism that has continue to live in our daily lives. And all people are now being called to stand up and no longer lack psychological standing. And in our case, what we've been advocating on for League is to be anti-racist and speak about racism in light, not just as it formerly has been around acute hate speech and crime and murder related to race, but also racism to the degree that it's in the air that we breathe because of the systemic and institutional racial policies, because of just the differentiation of what it's like growing up in this country, Black versus white. Now off of that and related to sport, and speaking of ways that we can reconcile, you think about South Africa, and one of the favorite quotes I have related to sport come from Nelson Mandela: "Sport has the power to change the world." Nelson Mandela also led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And I think, it's a unique one for me to reflect on given the context of this conversation, because all of what we are doing in our jobs, not only from our skilled labor we had talked about as players and coaches and front offices and our employees and getting them back to work, but also the impact that MLS and PLL are putting and resources and investment into the youth game and ways that we're going to contribute. And I know, Jeremy, you had mentioned that not all the youth programs get access to Dr. Fauci, but because of our investment in the youth side of things, and I assume MLS is doing the same, but we're developing medical protocol for our youth partners to share with based on our learning. So the net of it is that it's a difficult time, but sports is very well positioned to galvanize communities because of that core relationship that players have with each other from all different genders and creeds and race, that they have with their coaches, as Don alluded to, and certainly the power that the pro leagues have to impact change in a meaningful way.
Well, thank you both for being with us. Thank you for inspiring us and leading sports back. I know it's great to follow your example, and more importantly, take that invitation up to be great and to be impactful. So thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your time.
Take care.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Well, thanks again, Don and Paul. That was an incredible conversation that I think really provided a strategic lens to how the MLS and PLL are thinking about the return to play, but also how they're thinking about their engagement in youth sports. And going from the strategic down to the tactical, we wanted to stay with this theme of professional leagues and really understand what these leagues are doing to engage and impact youth sports, because especially in the wake of COVID, with everything that's going on, they're going to have an increasingly important role. So the way we're going to do this is really spotlight each of the efforts of the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Baseball, and really understand how they're approaching virtual sports education, how they're approaching the question of innovation and changing the way we play, and ultimately how they're facilitating more and more access to the game. So let's dive in. David Krakowski, Senior Vice President, Head of Youth Basketball Development at the NBA. Welcome to NextUp, Return to Play. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy. Thank you for convening this important conversation.
And I want to start with this idea of virtual training and virtual workouts, which I know I've enjoyed watching some of the junior NBA programs. And, a lot of organizations have had to figure out what virtual training is about and have to learn a lot. I think our data showed almost 70% of organizations either engage in some kind of virtual training or figuring out how to do that. So I'm curious, talk a little bit about what the junior NBA has done when it comes to virtual training and virtual workouts, what you've learned about the power of that as a medium.
Yeah, I think it's helpful in talking about virtual training to go back to early to mid-March when the COVID-19 pandemic, we really got a sense of what the scope and impact of that was going to be. And at the NBA, we had the benefit of being a global league, and the junior NBA is a global program. We reach 60 million kids in 72 countries around the world. And one of those countries is, of course, China, where we have an active junior NBA program. And so they had gone through some of this. They had developed a program they called Junior NBA Home Class and shared some learnings with us. And so when the NBA suspended our season at the professional level in mid-March, we realized that social distancing measures would be put in place, that we would all be asked to stay home, and that was going to challenge all of us, and especially young people, and that we wanted to help be part of the solution, give kids opportunities to continue to work on their skills, to stay active. We know that how important fitness is, and also to continue to connect with the NBA, with our players and with our teams. And so we created relatively quickly, proud that we launched this, March 20th, I believe, is when we launched our Junior NBA at Home platform, which now includes a lot of different programs and a lot of different layers that we can talk about, but effectively is an interactive content series that includes basketball skills and drills and fitness activities, largely delivered by NBA and WNBA players and coaches, all designed for young people who might be at home, can be done in limited space, and allows them to, as I said, to stay active and continue to participate in basketball.
Is there something about virtual training that you think will be a permanent feature, even as organizations and facilities open back up? Is there something about virtual training that you think is here to stay?
We can also not just connect with larger numbers of kids, but there can be a real feedback loop that happens through tools like Home Court, where we continue to work with kids, not just while they're with us, but at home.
And you mentioned a tool like Home Court, so maybe you could talk about, what is that? What is the Home Court tool? I know the NBA is involved with it, and what does that tell you about where the future is going with the kind of technology that's behind that?
Yeah, I do think it speaks to the power of technology. And so for those that don't know, it's a mobile application that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to deliver drills, challenges, competitions for young people, and allows them to engage with each other and allows them to compete against themselves as well. And it's global in its reach. Particularly well suited to this time when kids are being asked to stay at home. And so the number of the amount of engagement and the number of dribbles, I think they've been averaging 12 million dribbles a day in recent days, one of the most successful apps in the App Store. But it allows us to really connect with kids in a new and different way.
When you think back, and you mentioned by March 20th, you had rolled out this Junior NBA at Home platform. What have you learned? What have you learned through that process that maybe represents best practices that you could give advice to organizations out there?
Yeah, a few things for sure. First, that you need to have different types of content. And so kind of the core Junior NBA, content is a short form video, maybe 30 to 90 seconds, as I said, often delivered by an NBA or WNBA player or coach. A quick activity break, particularly good for parents or young people who are doing homeschooling and need to mix it up and get their kid active. But maybe that's not well suited for older players or more advanced players. And so we developed these, what we call Junior NBA at Home workouts, longer form workouts, 15 or 20 minutes, where you have, a pretty advanced Junior NBA coach or trainer working out with an NBA or WNBA player. We've had some terrific professionals, some of the young stars in our league, like Malik Beasley and Wendell Carter and Michael Carter-Williams, that have done these drills with our coaches. And they're awesome workouts. And when players go through them, the feedback we get is that they got better. And they know what it takes to train at the professional level. And so we saw success with that. And then we realized, we need to continue to speak to young players, but we also need to speak with coaches. And so we developed the Junior NBA Coaches Corner podcast. We've continued with the Junior NBA Live series that we've worked with you on, Jeremy. And so one learning is certainly just having a range of different programs to serve different parts of our audience. I'd say another learning is the power of user-generated content. And so it's one thing for us to push out these kind of virtual training tools. It's really important also for us to take in and to create a feedback loop, and that's what really leads to high levels of engagement. I'd say a third thing, and I guess being the Junior NBA, we should have known this, was always lead with kids.
Right.
You would think a drill led by an NBA player would perform far better than a drill led by a kid. Really, when you have both, is when we see the top performance. And so, put kids first is another one of the lessons that we've taken away.
Yeah, and what's great is so many of those lessons are so applicable to grassroots organizations and the leaders that are listening to this conversation, because they can co-create this with their coaches and with their kids, as opposed to just thinking they have to do this on their own. One thing you talked about is the Junior NBA Live, which it's worth noting has been going on for over a year, well in advance of even of this period. And there's obviously the new podcast series. You did the conference online. So a lot of what you focused on when we think about virtual sports education is not simply about workouts and drills, but the broader platform that sports represents. And then that also seems to be a broader opportunity. So can you speak a little bit about the opportunity for online education beyond the court and what you've learned when you've gotten into topics like, character development and culture and mental health and all the other best practices? Talk a little bit about that broader idea of virtual sports education.
Yeah, I mean, coaches are on the front lines of so many things, and we do in-person coaching development sessions, and we're going to continue to do that. But to really scale, to really reach, there's an opportunity to do that digitally, and that's what Junior NBA Live has been a part. And so we've themed some of those sessions around, hardcore kind of on-court issues, X and O's, and developing practice plans and coaching philosophies. But coaches need to think about and address issues much broader than that. Issues like mental health and, particularly pertinent and important right now, issues of race and issues of inclusion, issues around how do you develop young athletes of character. And so those are all topics that we've taken head on. We need to do a ton more in that area. And I think we're going to take these learnings as it relates to virtual education and double down, not just on in-person, which we will, but on virtual education as well. And really, as I said, address these issues head on.
Final question. We've heard a lot about our resources that the NBA, Junior NBA and the NBA have created. How can people access those resources? And do they have to pay for them, or what's the best way for them to utilize them and distribute those?
I'm glad you asked, Jeremy. All free, all at our website, juniornba.com. We have a terrific app, our Junior NBA Coaches app. So encourage everyone to download that, where you download your apps. And really our view is we want to be a resource for the youth basketball ecosystem on a global basis. And so everything is available, and we'd be happy to, develop new resources. So if there are ideas that folks have out there, please let us know.
Well, David, thank you and the NBA and the Junior NBA for all the incredible work that you're doing. As you mentioned, now is such an important time. And as we think about the NBA's return, as we think about what society is going through, as we think about the return to play at the youth level, there's so much potential for sports to really bring about a lot of healing and a lot of important conversations. So thank you for inspiring us. I know at League Apps we're honored to work with you, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Well, I'm very excited to welcome into this conversation Kim Davis, Senior Executive Vice President for Social Impact, Growth Initiatives, and Legislative Affairs for the NHL, and a good friend of mine, someone I look up to and take a lot of inspiration from. So Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
So Kim, we're talking a lot about this return to play and how youth and local sports organizations around the country are opening back up. And I think there's a lot that they can learn from the NHL, the example that you're setting and the way that you're thinking about innovation, because that's what organizations are having to confront. And maybe one place to start that conversation and this idea of how the NHL is part of changing the game is to think differently about sport. That a lot of organizations right now are saying, okay, how do I come back and play hockey or other sports if I can't get access to the rink, or I can't get access to the space, or I have to play that differently? And I think what the NHL, through the initiatives that you've taken on, something like street hockey, have thought differently about new forms of play that have actually embraced those kinds of things as opportunities, not just limitations.
Yeah, it's an interesting moment, and we never would have imagined that COVID would require us to have to use these off ramps as a new entry point for our sport. But long before any of this happened, we have been thinking about ways in which to engage and embrace kids in communities where no ice exists and ice may never exist. And so the idea of having street hockey as not only an on-ramp to ice hockey, but it can stand alone and be a way, particularly in urban areas and in rural areas, for kids to engage with the sport and ultimately become fans, because we know that they consume the game differently anyway. They may not ever go to a stadium, but they will still be consumers of the sport using social media and other platforms.
And so are there examples of where you've tested out the idea of street hockey, and are people receptive to a new way of thinking about the game of hockey?
Yeah, there've been a number of examples across our 31 clubs where deck and street hockey rinks have been set up. Our legacy project after the San Jose All-Star game was a $100 million commitment to a deck rink in San Jose, which is basically providing an opportunity at a school in a community for kids to consume. Pittsburgh has done a tremendous amount of work around deck facilities and creating opportunities for street hockey. I think one of the most exciting efforts that we've launched almost right before COVID hit was the Learn, Play, Score initiative in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings. And there are a number of facets to Learn, Play, Score, but ultimately it's about looking at all of the ways, both on ice and off ice, that we can engage kids in Detroit, where Detroit is hockey town, right? Something like 93% of Detroiters are Black, and yet we don't have our share of that market in hockey. So street hockey has become a major part of that initiative, and they're pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars, $1 million in total in the initiative, hundreds of thousands of dollars behind street hockey.
And one of the things I think there seems an opportunity is to convert play spaces so that there's, you know, and as organizations are thinking about, okay, how do they create adaptive ways of playing? It seems one of the ways is to convert the way that you might have normally played into using those totally different ways.
Yeah, one of the things that occurred to us, and it should occur to, it should occur to us a long time ago, is that if you look particularly in urban areas, on almost every other corner, there's a basketball hoop, an opportunity for kids to do pickup basketball. And we worked with a manufacturer and a partner to come up with a schematic and an architecture where we could take basketball hoops and easily convert them with nets on a basketball court, because the court is basically the same. And so we are testing in a couple of markets. Boston, we're testing it. Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, this idea of creating pickup hockey games in these centers where we're taking the equipment and putting it in where these basketball hoops exist. And over time, we want to partner with boys and girls clubs and others where we can actually more formalize it more. But right now, we're just giving kids an opportunity, and we're testing and measuring whether or not people are going to pick up street hockey the way they pick up basketball.
Kim, final question for you is, we live at an incredible moment of history where there are conversations around questions of race and equity and community and privilege. These are all surfacing to the top. And it seems like sports is at the forefront of that conversation. In the best traditions of Willie O'Ree and Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali, what is the message that you want to deliver, especially to people that are running youth organizations around this country, about the opportunity they have in terms of the sports as a vehicle to help maybe push this country forward in a really positive direction?
I think for our sport, the best example of this is illustrated by what we've seen hockey players do over the course of the past 5 days. Hockey has never been a sport where players stood up and spoke truth to social justice. And we have now, as of today, over 130 players who have stood up and said and used their voice and their platforms to talk about change. We're going to capture the moment of that, and every parent of every child who is engaged in hockey or not should understand that while hockey is absolutely a white sport, our ethos for the future of hockey is for us to come together and to be better than ourselves, to be better than society. And that's what we're focused on, and that's what we're going to measure ourselves by. And the players have given us a great roadmap to follow in their own behaviors over the course of the past 5 days.
And it's such a powerful invitation for these community of youth and local sports leaders to take up that mantle as well, and to figure out ways of, they can be part of the solution. They don't have to wait for change to happen. They can create that kind of change. And that is what sports teaches us, right? And how you respond to adversity and how you get better. And we're seeing that example through NHL players and certainly through the NHL. So thank you, Kim, for your leadership and for your inspiration. And I assume that people can go to certainly the NHL.com and learn more about all the breadth of initiatives that you all have.
Absolutely. And we're putting together a library of resources that we're going to be published next week that will even provide even further work and resources around this important issue.
Great. Well, we'll be sure to share that. And again, thank you for all that you do for youth sports. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
I'm excited to welcome David James into this conversation. David James is the Vice President of Baseball and Softball Development at Major League Baseball. We're honored to call partners at League Apps. And David, welcome to the conversation. Welcome to Next Up Return to Play. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good to be with you, and thank you for having us.
And what I really wanted to focus on today's conversation in an area that Major League Baseball and you in particular have been a leader is this question of accessibility and equity in youth sports, is making sure that every child has access to a great sports experience, and specifically baseball and softball. So even before the COVID crisis, talk to me a little bit about the challenge that you saw around questions of equity and accessibility for kids to have access to sports.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think from Major League Baseball's perspective, I think the first bucket would be access and making sure kids, communities, adults who want a affordable baseball, softball, quite honestly, play experience. I think that's really what we've worked on over the last 5 to 6 years, is developing programming that are adaptable. Listen, we want every community to play, but we also understand that there's some challenges in some specific communities more than others, whether it has to do with field, whether it's the cost to play the game, the equipment, the right type of volunteer. So it is a comprehensive effort, but we talk a lot through, the core of our programming, looking to target underserved kids, underserved communities with resources so they can get outside and play.
And it seems that the heart of that is recognizing the need for a comprehensive solution. I wonder, as you sit and watch the COVID crisis unfold, the economic crisis connected to that, are you concerned that this question of affordability and access might get worse?
Yeah, yes. Access is going to be an issue. A lot of the programming that we operate along with the 30 major league clubs tends to be in some of the metropolitan areas. And what we're finding is access to fields is probably right now, in fairness to Park and Recreation departments, it's unknown. It's the safety first, but then once they transition to start to open up, what does that access look like? What's going to be required? And then affordability, and I think that this is something that it's going to take a little bit longer before we get our arms around it in the youth sports space, is affordability. What do these programs look like moving forward? And more importantly, what is the threshold for these families, these communities that are being impacted by all of these other factors, and where does that recreation dollar, where does that fit in, especially if it's been reduced?
When you think about the programs that you've won, can you talk a little bit about the kind of the type of programs and initiatives that Major League Baseball has that's try to make sure that kids in underserved communities have access to baseball and softball?
Absolutely. It's really two buckets. Grassroots, which all falls underneath the umbrella of the play ball program, which we're 5 years in from now. And now with this particular program where we do activations, the clubs do activations, recreational sort of sandlot type 90-minute events, which really the focus is on introducing kids, families, organizations that aren't currently playing. From the standard league play perspective, we have the RBI program, Reviving Baseball in Inner Cities. Typically, we impact anywhere between 160 to 200,000 kids annually with that program. And then I mentioned the 30 clubs and the events that they're doing in their respective markets. On the development side, there are youth academies, 3 of them which are run by Major League Baseball's offices out of New Orleans, Compton, California, and then now the Jackie Robinson Training Center, which was formerly known as Dodgertown in Vero Beach. Those and the other club-run facilities do development events, so kids that are participating in our programs or other programs that don't necessarily have the means to participate in a lot of the showcase tournaments, things like that. We've evolved and are doing our own events that's bringing in college coaches, in some instances pro scouts. And what we're really proud is that's being mirrored on the softball side also with the large relationship with USA Softball.
There are a lot of people that are listening to this that against the backdrop of an historic conversation around questions of equity and equality and racism, as you see the scenes that of the streets filled with people that are really raising these concerns. And I wonder if there are organizations that are out there that are saying, how can I be part of the solution? What are the ways that if I believe deeply in the way that sports can make a difference, and I want to make sure that other kids have access that don't, what advice would you give to them about the ways that they could be helpful or involved, especially if they're looking to figure out solutions that they might participate in to help serve underserved communities?
It's outreach. One of the most unique things that our department has gone through over the stay-at-home orders is that we're calling every one of our RBI leagues, checking in, finding out how they're doing, how their kids are doing, the families are doing. Quite honestly, we're asking about them before we start to even think about the conversation about what does a season look like, just to get an understanding of what they're going through. I think that would be the main thing, and it's park and recreation departments. Quite honestly, right now, we're all in this together. Reach out to other youth leagues that have affiliations with other programs. Unfortunately, I think everyone will see a decline in participation. So where are there opportunities to pool your resources, to glean some information in regards to what should your policies and procedures be for the year to make sure that everyone feels comfortable to participate?
You've had a huge role when it came to impacting grassroots baseball and softball and leading the way for ensuring what a pro league can do. And, and that's going to be even more important in the days, weeks, and years to come. So thanks for all that you're doing, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you guys very much. I'm glad to work with you.